Salafis are ultra-conservative Muslims who really advocate an adherence to all the strict interpretations of the religion, of the Quran, of the Prophet, saying they dress like the Prophet in terms of the long galabayas, in terms of growing their beard. Their women are normally covered with the face veil or the niqab. Now, they are the group that initially called for the protest on Tuesday, coinciding with the anniversary of September 11, because they heard the movie was going to be broadcast in the States on that date. That's the first group that started taking part in these protests. Would you like me to go on, or would you like us to go through the breakdown?
Well, let me follow up. Thank you. Let me follow up on that point. The Salafists, who are a part of this demonstration, the ultra-conservative group that you just mentioned, do they advocate violence in this context, the context of this anti-Islam video?
In the context of this very specific incident, we actually managed to interview 2 days ago the very man who first issued the call for this protest on Egyptian TV stations. He was the head of the Salafi coalition who originally called for this protest and then backed out after the violence broke outside the United States embassies. Now, he specifically told us that they were not advocating violence, that the point for calling for the protest, in fact, he said, we're very much aware that the United States government is not linked to this movie in any form, but it was our only way, our only venue to go outside the embassy of the government where the men who produced this film reside, to ask them to take action against these men to stop the airing or the broadcast of this movie. They had no intention for violence. In fact, he told me they were not happy when men scaled the wall and brought down the U.S. flag. And there was really a turning point here when Ambassador Stevens in Libya lost his lives in the attack. You could clearly see the turning point there with Salafis then saying, and with the violence outside the embassy here between the protesters and riot police increasing. That's when the Salafis decided they're going to be pulling out from these protests, at least here in Cairo.
And yet the leaders of the Salafis in Egypt have not appeared. Maybe they've spoken to you, but I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong here. They haven't certainly appeared on camera. I haven't spoken to one of the leaders in a phone conversation to voice concerns, to call for calm as these demonstrations have continued today. Have you spoken to leaders, and have they expressed to you concerns about the continuing unrest, and have they called for calm?
I'm not sure I entirely heard the question. Leaders from, you're asking if...
Leaders of the Salafis.
Salafi leaders?
Yes. Have they spoken to you? Because they certainly haven't spoken to me, my colleague Laura Kyle, in the last few hours as the demonstrations continue there in Cairo to call for calm.
Well, they have actually participated firsthand in the attempts to mediate or negotiate with the protesters on the ground. Overnight, we have seen members from the Salafi Noor party trying to address these protesters and ask them to leave the perimeter of the U.S. Embassy. These attempts were unfortunately not successful, and we've seen how the clashes continued throughout the day today. In terms of an overall call, it has come through their statements, but once again, once these protests start, they really take a life of their own, Tony. And you have been discussing at length with my colleagues in Washington and other parts of the world the issue of whether the United States had done enough to really express concern about this movie. It's worth mentioning that those Salafi leaders, from the very first day when the protests began, said that the United States Embassy in Cairo directly contacted them, members of the Noor Party and the Salafi coalition, expressing their dismay at the movie, saying that this movie does not represent American values, but at the same time, American values is to respect freedom of speech, but at the same time not insult religions. And in fact, those Salafi leaders tweeted and issued statements making it very clear and thanking officials from the embassy here in Cairo for expressing their dismay about this movie.